in order to get Zephyr's sweetheart back. I became the new hostage of the kidnappers. Zephyr said that the snipers were in position, and I would be in no danger. But he didn't know that in 5 minutes, the kidnappers would detonate the bombs on their bodies and die together with me. The kidnapper held a gun against my head and pushed Nova to Zephyr. I saw Zephyr nervously check Nova all over. Then, his brows relaxed, and he hugged her tightly. From start to finish, Zephyr didn't turn his head to look at me once. Host. The cold voice of the system came. It seems that the task of conquering Zephyr has failed again. This was the 3rd year of my marriage to Zephyr and also my 9th attempt to conquer him. Unfortunately, he still hadn't fallen in love with me. 10 minutes ago, Zephyr without hesitation agreed on my behalf to the hostage exchange. Kala. They dare not hurt you. Although Zephyr was a bit reluctant, he still winked at the bodyguard beside him. The snipers are already in position. Nova is delicate. I don't want her to be involved in this bloody matter. The bodyguard put his hand on my shoulder and exerted some force secretly. I couldn't move. I resignedly said okay, but couldn't help swearing in my heart. Zephyr didn't know that in 5 minutes, the kidnappers would detonate the bombs on their bodies and die together with me. Once bitten, twice shy. Before dying, I skillfully reduced the pain perception. I still remember the first time I tried to conquer Zephyr. Nova and I were trapped in a sea of fire. Zephyr picked up the unconscious Nova in one go. He glanced at me who was injured beside, hurriedly dropped a weight for me, and then turned around and disappeared from my sight. At that time, I naively thought that Zephyr would come to save me. But it was not until I was burned to death by the fire that I knew that Zephyr was busy pouring out his heart to Nova who had woken up. Maybe the system saw that I was in too much pain before death. After that, I had the ability to adjust the pain perception. The system told me that I had one last chance left. I knew that if I still failed, not only would my wish not be fulfilled, but I would also be completely erased. To Kala. I don't like you. Have you no shame? With a crashing sound, Zephyr forcefully knocked off my hand that was grabbing his arm. Familiar scene. Familiar words. Familiar hell-like start. I was back to the day when Zephyr was forced to marry me. Zephyr's voice was not small, and the guests around immediately looked over. They were whispering, with obvious ridicule in their eyes. I ignored those unfriendly looks and the stinging pain on the back of my hand. I just silently followed behind Zephyr, waiting for the first opportunity to come. When Zephyr passed by the lobby, the crystal chandelier above would suddenly fall. In the previous attempts, I had accurately pulled him aside every time. Then I took the opportunity to throw myself into his arms and shed a few tears of fear afterwards. Seeing this, Zephyr was too embarrassed to be mean to me again. But I never expected that Nova would be standing under that chandelier this time. Zephyr didn't want Nova to see me. He turned his head and threatened me fiercely. Kala. If you don't want to die, stay away. But in the next second, he followed my line of sight and discovered the swaying chandelier above Nova's head. Nova. Be careful. Zephyr shouted in horror and threw himself fiercely on Nova. Zephyr. I was anxious but grabbed nothing. I had to rush forward and push them away forcefully. Zephyr couldn't be in trouble. If he died, my task would be directly judged as a failure. At that instant, I didn't even have time to reduce the pain perception. It felt as if my internal organs had been smashed. The intense pain made me faint instantly. That night, my wedding with Zephyr became a hot topic on the internet. Kala was covered in blood at the wedding scene. Who was the mysterious woman in Zephyr's arms? The grand and solemn wedding ended up as a joke in the end. In a photo that was widely spread on the internet, Zephyr was kneeling on the ground with his arms around Nova. His astonished gaze was fixed in the distance. There lay me, covered in blood and with an unknown state of life or death. 3 When I woke up, I didn't see Zephyr. Nova had an asthma attack due to the shock that day, and was sent to the hospital together with me. Zephyr only took a quick look at me, and then stayed by Nova's side all the time. My mother was indignant and asked me in disappointment if I had to have Zephyr. Mom, if something happened to Zephyr, I couldn't live either. I was helpless in my heart and told the truth euphemistically. But Zephyr, who was just about to enter the door, heard it clearly. He looked at me with a complex expression, seeming a bit troubled and a bit at a loss. He said thank you to me, and then sorry. Kala, Nova is not well yet, so she won't come to thank you in person. After my mother left, Zephyr added casually as if Nova was the one who was seriously injured. Coincidentally, I didn't want to see Nova's affected posture either, so I nodded inferently. The doctor said that my condition was unstable and I couldn't be left alone. Maybe to repay me for saving his life, Zephyr took the initiative to take on the task of accompanying me. But soon after, he received a call from Nova. A delicate voice came from the other end of the phone. Zephyr, are you accompanying Kala? Suddenly I want to eat the wonton from the store at the West Street entrance. I don't know. I'll go and buy it right away. Before Nova could finish her words, Zephyr said without hesitation. I clearly saw the smile on Zephyr's lips. This idiot with a love-sick brain. After hanging up the phone, Zephyr seemed to remember the doctor's instructions and looked at me with difficulty. I knew that store. There was always a long queue every time. I thoughtfully told Zephyr not to worry about me. After only a moment of hesitation, he stood up. Sorry. I'll be back as soon as possible. He nodded slightly to me and then casually asked me if I wanted wonton. I shook my head gently and showed him a wronged and lonely side face. Sure enough. Zephyr paused for a moment. When he turned around and left, a trace of guilt flashed across his face. But how could I have expected that things would be so coincidental? As soon as Zephyr left, I felt a sharp pain in my head. I forced myself to endure the dizziness and pressed the call button. The nurse urgently pushed me into the ICU, but couldn't get in touch with Zephyr to sign for a long time. The system told me that Zephyr was queuing to buy wonton, and didn't hear the phone ring at all. What a sin. I shouldn't have pretended to be magnanimous to win his favor just now. I regretted it so much that I rolled my eyes and completely lost consciousness. For when I woke up again, I saw the palm print on Zephyr's face and couldn't help laughing. Kala. Zephyr turned his face away angrily. Did you do it on purpose? I was only away for 10 minutes. And you got yourself into the ICU? I shook my head, suppressing my schadenfreude with difficulty, and timidly said sorry. Maybe because of guilt. Zephyr was stunned for a moment, and then closed his mouth embarrassed lie. That day, Zephyr accompanied me for the first time, until Nova troubled him again, embarrassed lie. Zephyr, has Kala woken up? After eating the wonton, my stomach is a bit uncomfortable. Is it convenient for you to call the doctor for me? Since Nova had given an order. Of course it was extremely convenient, for Zephyr. Kala. Stay well. Next week I'll accompany you to be discharged from the hospital. Before leaving in a hurry, Zephyr instructed me in a condescending manner. I nodded but didn't take it to heart. Zephyr had said a lot of similar things, but without exception, he would break his promise because of Nova. After Zephyr left, I found a bowl of wonton on the table. It had been too long. The wonton had absorbed all the soup and was sticky huddled together. It looked completely unappetizing. I threw it into the trash can expressionlessly. On the day I was discharged from the hospital, Nova happened to be moving. Zephyr sent his assistant to pick me up and take me home. When I woke up from the sofa, Zephyr's coat was draped over me. Zephyr was working in the study. I decided to take the opportunity to show some hospitality, and brought him a cup of hot milk. Thank you. Zephyr didn't raise his head and frowned as he rubbed his chest. I immediately became alert. Zephyr had congenital heart disease. Every time he felt uncomfortable, he would do this action. Where are your pills? I saw that Zephyr's lips were blue-purple and asked nervously. I accidentally left them at Nova's house. She said that there were a lot of things during the move and she would give them to me when she found them in a few days. Zephyr didn't care at all, which made my blood rush to my head. Zephyr. Is there something wrong with your heart or your brain? Doesn't Nova know that these pills are very important? I was so angry that I couldn't help raising my voice. In a few days, you might be ashes. Since I mentioned Nova, Zephyr's face had become ugly. He wore a solemn expression, stood up and grabbed my arm. Kala, get out. Zephyr was very strong. I felt a tearing pain in my back. It hurts. My wound has split open. I cried out in pain. But Zephyr turned a defiant, dragged me straight towards the door. Zephyr, let go. I couldn't break free no matter what. And in a hurry, I bit his arm. Zephyr's footsteps suddenly stopped. He let go of my arm and bent down in pain. With a bang, I watched Zephyr fall in front of me. I rummaged everywhere. But Zephyr's spare medicine was gone too. I had never seen Zephyr have such a severe illness attack. For a while, I was at a loss. The system reminded me that Zephyr could hold on for at most 20 minutes. It took only 5 minutes to drive to the nearest municipal hospital. Thanks to the system, I successfully carried Zephyr on my back. Hiss! There was another sharp pain in the wound on my back. And I couldn't help but groan softly. The warm liquid soaked my clothes and Zephyr's. I endured the pain and moved with difficulty towards the parking lot. Kala. Zephyr regained consciousness at some point and struggled weakly. Put me down. You're bleeding. I was unbalanced by him, and staggered a few steps, almost falling to the ground. When I cried out in pain, Zephyr ignored me. But now when I was saving him, he came to make trouble for me. Don't move. I was both angry and anxious and slapped Zephyr's butt hard. You. Whether it was because of anger or shyness. As soon as he finished speaking, he fainted again. I stuffed Zephyr into the car. The moment I touched the steering wheel, I shivered violently. Painful memories swept over me. My hands and feet seemed to be imprisoned, and uncontrollable tears welled up in my eyes. I cried and begged the system to help me. And next second, the car started. Help! Help! As soon as we arrived at the hospital, I dragged Zephyr out of the car while shouting, Zephyr mustn't be in trouble. I was extremely anxious, watching him being carried away on a stretcher. My legs suddenly went weak and I could no longer hold myself up. I knelt on the ground and covered my face, crying bitterly. I was all too familiar with this hospital. I had accompanied Zephyr here many times. Every time, I would seemingly pass by that ward unintentionally. Through the glass on the door, I peeked at the person lying on the hospital bed. He was as quiet as if he were asleep, just like how he looked when he was lying beside me in the past. But now, not only could I not be by his side all the time, but I also had to pray to God again and again for the safety of another man. Zephyr and I were placed in the same ward. He even woke up half a day earlier than me. Kala. It's the first time I've seen someone enter the ICU because of excessive grief. Zephyr's words sounded a bit sarcastic. But in his eyes, there was a trace of confusion. Seemingly casually, he asked me if I was so afraid of his death. I stared at his eyes, which were similar to that person's, and nodded seriously. Zephyr, you know, if something happened to you, I couldn't live either. This was the second time I said this. After being stunned for a long time, Zephyr threw a psycho at me. Then he lay down with his back to me and stopped talking. I saw a blush quietly creeping up his ears. The air became quiet, but the alarm of the system kept ringing in my ears. Zephyr's heart rate was continuously rising. After a while, Zephyr suddenly sat up. He frowned with a tangled expression. After a long while, as if having no other choice with me, he said, Kala, I won't be like this in the future. This was the first time Zephyr made a promise to me after I saved his life once again. Before being discharged from the hospital, Zephyr told me that his cousin was also in this hospital. Kala, tomorrow is exactly my cousin's birthday. I'll take you to see him, Zephyr said and added unnaturally. After all, you are my nominal wife. My heart skipped to beats. But it wasn't because of the latter sentence. suppressing my inner excitement. I nodded and said okay. The next day, I bought a bunch of purple irises. Zephyr took a look and raised his eyebrows, saying what a coincidence. He said that his cousin's family had collected a lot of paintings of irises. Really? Then it is indeed a coincidence. I blandly echoed. I followed Zephyr and stood beside that person's bed. I traced his eyebrows and eyes of my eyes again and again, forcing back the soreness in my nose. I blinked hard to keep my tears from falling. Eric, just wait a little longer. When I conquers Zephyr, you will be able to wake up. 7 on the way back. I was in a trance. Zephyr called me several times, but I didn't react. Kala, have you lost your soul? Zephyr pressed the horn hard and complained. You kept staring at my cousin in the hospital, and now you look so distracted. What on earth is wrong with you? Zephyr looked at me suspiciously. I was afraid that he would discover something, so I lied that Eric looked so much like him that I was a little carried away for a moment. Zephyr thought of the incident where I was scared into the ICU by him and patiently comforted me a couple of sentences. In the previous attempts to conquer, Zephyr had never noticed my attention to Eric. But now, he obviously began to care about my every move. Maybe the chandelier incident really had a butterfly effect. Zephyr had been very busy since being discharged from the hospital, and my progress in conquering him also stalled. Until one day 3 months later, Zephyr took the initiative to propose to accompany me to Lingyan Temple. The weather was sunny that day. And unexpectedly, Zephyr wasn't called away by Nova either. He walked with me up the 99 steps in front of the temple. Halfway through, because he thought I walked too slowly, he even took the initiative to hold my hand. He was puzzled why I came to worship the Buddha every month. Pray for the well-being of the person I love. May he recover soon and be worry-free for 100 years. I looked piously at the Buddha in front of me and murmured softly. I didn't see the deep, fixed gaze of Zephyr beside me. On the way down the mountain, Zephyr suddenly stopped me. Kala. He touched his nose, his tone awkward and serious. My heart will be fine for the time being. So, you don't need to come here on purpose every month. Zephyr had misunderstood my prayer in front of the Buddha. I lowered my head and smiled wryly. I didn't explain it to him but just said some nice words to coax him, taking advantage of his misunderstanding. That night, we stayed in a homestay halfway up the mountain. The night view was beautiful. Zephyr said he would accompany me to watch the stars. But as soon as he finished speaking, he received a call from Nova. A power outage at Nova's home. She was afraid of the dark and wanted Zephyr to accompany her. Zephyr looked at me being tangled lie and hesitated for the first time. Don't go. Okay? Suddenly, I had the intention of testing him. So I grabbed his sleeve and begged pitifully. Zephyr pursed his lips in silence, his expression changing several times. Boom. There was a sudden loud noise from the other end of the phone. Nova, what's wrong with you? Zephyr immediately came to his senses. He no longer looked at me but was anxiously asking about Nova over and over again. Zephyr, I can't move my legs. Can you come quickly? Nova seemed to be injured. She kept crying and urging Zephyr. Wait for me. I'll be there right away. Zephyr frowned tightly and suddenly pulled his arm that I was holding. Caught off guard, I was pulled down to the ground by him, and my head hit the stone table beside me. Zephyr turned his head when he heard the sound. He seemed to want to come and help me, but Nova on the other end of the phone held him back. After Zephyr left, I received a message from him. He asked me if I was seriously injured from the fall just now. He also said that he would come to pick me up early the next morning. I threw the phone aside self-mockingly. I ignored the wound on my forehead and sat in the yard and began to count the stars. Eric once told me that every star in the sky was a wish of the world's people. But suddenly it began to rain, and everything was gray. I couldn't find my star. System. Will I still fail this time? The system didn't answer me but only let out a reluctant sigh. At that instant, pain, grievance, sadness, fatigue, All negative emotions surged into my heart. I could no longer hold back and broke down crying. I cried so sadly that I couldn't tell whether it was rain or tears on my face. Until an umbrella sheltered me from the wind and rain. Kala. A familiar voice rang out. And I suddenly raised my head. Unable to believe my eyes. I had never seen Zephyr look so disheveled. His hair was wet and messily stuck to his forehead. Kala. Zephyr gasped for breath and asked me unhappily. Are you planning to cry here all night? I looked at the flush on Zephyr's face and was very worried. Zephyr. Is your heart okay? After hearing this, Zephyr stared at me with a complex expression. Hesitant to speak. The air was so quiet that only the sound of the rain could be heard. But the system once again sounded the alarm. Just because of Zephyr's heart rate that couldn't calm down for a long time. Alas. A resigned sigh broke the silence. The corners of Zephyr's mouth turned up. With a bit of helpless doting. Kala. He suddenly bent down close to me. His voice more gentle than ever. His breath sprayed on my face one after another. If you keep looking at me, I'm going to kiss you. Zephyr gently asked me to close my eyes. He was getting closer and closer to me. I was suddenly startled, and just managed to turn my head sideways. His warm lips landed on the corner of my mouth. This was my 10th attempt to conquer Zephyr. But it was also the first time he kissed me. Zephyr explained to me that after the heavy rain, he was a bit restless. So, regardless of Nova's retention, he braved the rain to come back to the homestay to find me. Fortunately, I came back. Otherwise, you would still be getting wet in the rain. Obviously. These were complaining words. But Zephyr's eyes were full of heartache. After hearing this, I just said a restrained thank you and then fell into silence again. Since I dodged Zephyr's kiss, the atmosphere between us had become delicate. This was the first time Zephyr left Nova for me. I should have been happy. But because of that kiss, I was extremely distressed. I didn't know how long it would take to successfully conquer Zephyr. And I was even more worried about what Zephyr would do to me during this process. The progress of this conquest was much smoother than before. But I began to fall into a strange cycle. I wanted to conquer Zephyr as soon as possible. But I resisted the possible intimate behaviors with him. Fortunately, Zephyr had been on business trips frequently lately, and had no time to take care of me. Although I was being tangled in my heart, I still had a few months of peaceful days. Until one day, the scene from the previous life suddenly reappeared. 2 years earlier than in the previous life, Nova was once again in the hands of the kidnappers. Still the familiar statement. The condition for the hostage exchange was that I would replace Nova. I looked up and met Zephyr's eyes. And my heart tightened in an instant. He stepped forward and hugged me tightly. His body trembling continuously. I'm sorry, Kala. His lips were still lingering by my ear. But I clearly heard his reluctant murmur. In an instant, the bone-deep despair engulfed me. Zephyr's bodyguard, as in the previous life, held my shoulders tightly. This was already my last chance. I had to take a gamble. I knew that Zephyr was more receptive to softness than to toughness. I was just about to shamelessly kneel down to him. But the following scene was unexpected. I saw Zephyr turn around and raise his hands, walking towards the kidnapper step by step. Zephyr said that as the president of Zephyr Company, he was more valuable than a married-off Kala. The kidnapper was obviously tempted. He began to urge Zephyr with his gun. I was extremely astonished. My brain instantly stopped thinking. And only one voice repeatedly reminded me that Zephyr mustn't be in trouble. I struggled frantically, desperately trying to rush forward. But the bodyguard held me tightly. Zephyr, come back. Come back. I threw myself on the ground in despair. And my vision became blurred. I cried and shouted loudly. I wanted to tell him that the kidnapper had a bomb on him. But the system blocked my voice. Nova was still crying and urging Zephyr to save her. But Zephyr stopped. And for the first time, he turned around for me. He stared at me deeply and told me with lip language not to worry. I shook my head desperately, watching helplessly as the kidnapper pushed Nova away, and pointed the gun at Zephyr's forehead. Bang! The next second, blood splattered everywhere like falling petals. 11 Nova screamed and fainted. Zephyr's face was covered in blood. At his feet lay the slain kidnapper. The bodyguard let go of me. But my legs were so weak that I couldn't move. I saw the bodyguard go forward and pick up Nova, while Zephyr passed them by without stopping and ran straight towards me. "It's okay. Kala. It's okay." Zephyr hugged me tightly, constantly patting my back gently to comfort me. My body couldn't stop trembling. I raised my hand to gently wipe the blood off his face. Then, using all my strength, I slapped him hard. "Zephyr," I growled at him furiously. "In your heart, only Nova's life matters. Right? Do you think everyone else is dead?" Zephyr was stunned by my slap, but he knew he was in the wrong and kept saying sorry. Just a little bit more, and my task would have failed completely. I suddenly remembered my previous 9 miserable deaths. Remembered Zephyr's actions just now, regardless of his own life. Immediately, all the old and new hatred welled up in my heart. In a fit of rage, I spat out a mouthful of blood onto his face. I saw Zephyr's eyes widen in horror. "Kala! Kala!" He grabbed me tightly, shouting my name desperately. But I just felt my eyelids were heavy and my spirit was scattered. Before losing consciousness, I seemed to hear the system's congratulatory voice. When I woke up, I was still a bit dazed. The system said that at the moment I was unconscious, I had successfully conquered Zephyr. The last chance. In less than a year, it was like I was having a beautiful dream. Host. Congratulations. I could tell the system was also a bit relieved. Now, you can make your wish. The system said that on the day I spat blood, Zephyr ran outside with me in his arms like a madman. If the bodyguard hadn't steadied him and sent me to the hospital in time, Zephyr would probably have entered the ICU due to excessive heart load as well. Host. If there is no suitable heart source for the operation, Zephyr can live for at most 2 more years. The system asked me to think carefully before making a decision, whether to let Zephyr get a suitable heart source or to make Eric wake up. System. Why do you think I need to consider? I was puzzled and even found it a bit funny. I was willing to endure all kinds of grievances to conquer Zephyr just to wake Eric up. From the beginning to the end, Eric has been my firm and only choice. 12 Kala. Here. Zephyr handed me the roughly peeled apple. It could be seen that as a pampered young master, Zephyr had no experience in taking care of others at all. I waved my hand in disgust, indicating once again that I didn't want him to accompany me. Zephyr drooped his shoulders, and his expression immediately became gloomy. "Kala, I'm sorry. I really won't let you worry in the future. I once told Zephyr that if something happened to him, I couldn't live either. At that time, Zephyr promised me that there would be no next time. But now, he broke his promise because of the hostage incident." I withdrew my hand and replied inferently. "As you like. Anyway, my task had been completed. No matter how he tortured himself, it had nothing to do with me. I was telling the truth. But Zephyr mistakenly thought that I was still angry with him. Zephyr tried hard to find topics to talk to me, but I was always listless until he suddenly mentioned Derek, the person I missed day and night. "Kala, my cousin woke up a couple of days ago. The doctors all said it was a miracle. Nova actually has always liked my cousin. This time, she also cried for a long time with excitement. I think Zephyr probably wanted to clear up his relationship with Nova in front of me. But I sneered and rolled my eyes greatly. Back then, I was once so jealous of Nova that I said sarcastically to Eric that he was so lucky that both junior sisters liked him. Kala, it's different. I still remember how serious Eric was at that time. He said that I was the lover he was destined to meet in his life. It just so happened that I came to his side as a junior sister. At the moment when our eyes met, we could only see each other in our eyes. My name is Kala, and my lover is Eric. We have been in love for many years until a car accident separated us by life and death. But now, I am Kala, and also Zephyr's legal wife. 13 on the night I was discharged from the hospital. I came to the restaurant where I had an appointment with Zephyr. He said he had prepared a surprise for me. And I also happened to have something to tell him. But I didn't expect that Zephyr would break the appointment again because of Nova. He kept explaining to me on the phone that Nova had been rejected by Eric and was feeling so bad that she was drunk in the bar and was making a fuss about committing suicide. Kala, I'll come to you right away after I send Nova home. Zephyr apologized while begging me to wait for him a little longer. I was thinking about the thing that I hadn't said yet. So I had to be patient and wait. At 10 p.m. fireworks suddenly bloomed in the air one after another. The waiter told me that it was specially prepared by Zephyr for me. I looked speechless lie at the empty chair opposite me and just thought that the waiter was a bit humorous. I wanted to go home and sleep. I yawned and called Zephyr. When the call was answered, a familiar female voice came. Kala? It's me, Nova. Her coquetteous voice didn't show any sign of drunkenness at all. Zephyr is taking a bath. If you have something urgent, I can take the phone to him. Nova seemed to be very considerate. But between the lines, she showed her closeness to Zephyr. No need. I immediately felt it was funny. If you want to take a bath with Zephyr, you don't need to find an excuse. Nova was frustrated by Eric and wanted to make herself feel better by humiliating me. But she didn't know that even if she and Zephyr had a wild time now, I wouldn't mind at all. On the way back, a push notification suddenly popped up on my phone, followed by a sudden increase in messages. The mysterious woman appears again, having a passionate kiss with Zephyr on the street. The explosive headline on the hot search immediately aroused my curiosity. Zephyr's call also came at this time. Kala, don't believe those words on the internet. Just now Nova was drunk and suddenly kissed me. I pushed her away immediately. He was both angry and anxious, as if he had suffered a great injustice. I clicked on the photo under the hot search. I have to say, the candid angle was perfect. In the photo, Nova was on her tiptoes, closing her eyes and kissing Zephyr's lips. Although Zephyr's face was in the shadow and his expression couldn't be seen clearly. But it didn't make people think that he was reluctant at this moment. Maybe this photo could be useful in the future? I glanced at the divorce agreement beside me waiting for Zephyr's signature and pressed the save button before the public relations department deleted the post. 14 Zephyr and I returned home one after another. Without saying a word, Zephyr knelt down in front of me on the sofa. Was it necessary to make such a big fuss to apologize? I was startled. And then I saw him blush and raise one leg, solemnly taking out a pair of rings. Zephyr said affectionately that this was what he owed me on our wedding day. I listened to his rapid breathing and couldn't help but worry that when we talked about the divorce later, would he faint again? I awkwardly avoided the rings and handed over the divorce agreement beside me. Kala, did you take it wrong? Zephyr just glanced at it, and his face became ugly. But the next second, he saw my signed name on the agreement. Zephyr looked at a loss, and was obviously flustered. Kala, believe me, I really have nothing to do with Nova. His eyes immediately turned red with anxiety. Last night, she vomited all over me. I asked my assistant to bring clothes. After washing up, I thought of looking for you. And that's why I was delayed. Nova once saved me. She wanted to commit suicide. I really couldn't just ignore it. I'm wrong. I won't leave you for her again in the future. I promise you. Kala. The incident that Nova saved Zephyr, who had a sudden heart attack, once caused quite a stir in our school. Zephyr fell in love with Nova, at first sight after waking up. Since then, he has become her most outstanding pursuer. Thinking about it carefully, my 9 miserable deaths have also become part of their play. I couldn't help but get angry and interrupted impatiently. Zephyr, you don't need to promise me. Just sign it quickly. I had never spoken to Zephyr in such a tone. He was stunned in place for a moment, pursing his lips tightly with a lost and aggrieved look. I turned my head away, and didn't look at him anymore. After a while, I felt a weight on my knee. I saw Zephyr half kneeling and hugging my waist. gently resting his head on my lap. Kala, I love you. Zephyr's voice was muffled. I wanted to stand up, but his hands were tightly holding me. I should have told you long ago. I'm wrong. I won't let you be wronged a little bit in the future. So, don't mention divorce. Okay? Please. Kala. Zephyr carefully and humbly kept making promises to me, like an abandoned puppy, clumsily trying to please its master. At the moment when the task was successful, I knew that Zephyr loved me. But I never expected that the first time he said he loved me was right after I mentioned divorce. Doesn't this person know that belated affection is cheaper than grass? I wrinkled my brows with a bit of disgust. Besides, for me, it has never been a matter of being late, or not regarding Zephyr. Zephyr, I must get a divorce, I said firmly, leaving no room for negotiation. Because I don't love you. In an instant, Zephyr raised his red-eyed gaze and stared at me fixedly. 15 I thought Zephyr would angrily question me. But who knew that the next second, he grinned and started giggling. His head even rubbed affectionately in my arms. Was he mentally deranged from the shock? I was completely confused by Zephyr, only to hear him say with certainty, Kala, so you were just saying angry words. He seemed quite relieved. There are so many reasons for divorce. But you actually said you don't love me. You entered the ICU several times to save me. You said it yourself that if something happened to me, you couldn't live either. You would go to Lingyan Temple every month to pray for me. When I went to find Nova, you were sad and cried alone silently in the rain. Even when I became a hostage, you cried bitterly and once wanted to rush forward to replace me. Kala, all these things one by one are what you have done for me. How could you not love me? With every word Zephyr said, his expression grew sadder. As he spoke, the smile on his face disappeared and his voice began to tremble. A tear suddenly splashed onto the back of my hand. Kala, I'm sorry, came his voice, choked with sobs. This wasn't the first time Zephyr had said sorry to me, but it was the first time I felt his overwhelming guilt and remorse. Zephyr's tears wet the divorce agreement. I remained silent and only said, after he had calmed down, that I was moving out and that he could come to me when he was willing to get divorced. But Zephyr stubbornly shook his head and said that he would never get divorced, even if it killed him. Kala, this time it's my turn to pursue you. I will wait until the day you forgive me. Zephyr's serious look was exactly the same as Eric's. For a moment, I was stunned. Zephyr firmly believed that when I said I didn't love him, it was just angry words after being deeply hurt. It was a long story. At that moment, I even wanted to tell him everything. But when I thought of Eric and their relationship, I could only bitterly swallow my impulse. I knew that with my current identity, I was no longer qualified to be with Eric. All I wanted now was to get divorced from Zephyr quickly, and then wander around and spend the rest of my life alone. 16's Zephyr took the initiative to contact a TV station for a live interview. He apologized to me for the news on our wedding day, and also clarified the photo that was secretly taken a couple of days ago. I did have feelings for Nova in the past, but now I only love my wife. Kala. I've done a lot of wrong things in the past and made Kala extremely heartbroken. Now I just want to spend the rest of my life making up for it. Zephyr completely ignored the astonished host beside him and seriously condemned himself in public. Kala. I'm sorry. I love you. When the camera zoomed in, the obvious love in Zephyr's eyes almost overflowed the screen. The hot search topic stayed at the top for several days, and the comments below were polarized. Some scolded Zephyr as a scumbag, while others praised him as a real man. Some said that a prodigal son who has turned over a new leaf is more precious than gold, while others said that belated affection is cheaper than grass. The messages on my phone almost exploded. Even my mother was moved by Zephyr's self-sacrificing behavior and persuaded me several times. Kala. Mom has made some soup for you. When Zephyr brings it to you tonight, have a good talk with him. I heard the busy signal on the phone and immediately had a headache. I just wanted to get divorced quietly. But Zephyr had made it known to everyone. My infatuated image had been deeply rooted in people's hearts. And I could no longer use no feelings as a reason for divorce. Many netizens even left me messages saying that my hard days were over and asking me to remember to forgive Zephyr after torturing him. Everyone seemed to be partial to the plot of, when I love you, you ignore me. And when I leave, you regret and pursue me. But the most annoying one was still Zephyr, the main culprit. Besides going to my parents' place every day to curry favor, he also repeatedly asked me when I planned to torture him. Kala. Now there are so many people supervising me. Can you give me a chance to start anew? Zephyr pitifully begged me with his magnetic voice. I was so angry that I laughed instead. After sending, you are morally blackmailing me. I blocked his contact information without hesitation. 17 When I saw Zephyr at my doorstep, I remembered what my mother had said about bringing the soup. The wind at night was very cold, and Zephyr was only wearing a thin shirt. His pale face showed tiredness. But when he saw me, his eyes lit up instantly. Kala. Zephyr raised the thermos, smiling at me ingratiating lie. Mom made some soup for you. But I couldn't contact you, so I had to wait at your doorstep. I took the thermos, thanked him, and then tactfully asked him to leave. But Zephyr had the cheek to insist on seeing me finish the soup before leaving. The soup was a bit cold. I only took one sip and found that it wasn't made by my mother. It was really awful. I looked up, caught Zephyr's furtive glances, and saw the band-aid on his hand. I understood immediately. So, in front of him, I poured all the soup into the sink. Hey, Kala. You. Zephyr was too late to stop me. He stood behind me, looking as if he wanted to say something but hesitated. Zephyr, has Nova ever told you that the soup you make is terrible? As soon as I finished speaking, I saw Zephyr's face turn red instantly. No, Kala. It's not. I haven't made soup for Nova. It's my first time cooking and I have no experience. Next time I definitely won't make a mistake. Zephyr forced a smile and gently held my hand. Next time it might be even worse. I was so tired that I didn't want to be evasive with him anymore. And my tone became harsher. Zephyr. I poured out the soup not only because it tasted bad, but also because it was made by you. I don't need your kindness. Please don't bother me again until you agree to the divorce. I thought Zephyr would be angry and ashamed, or at least leave with a cold face. But he just remained silent. After a while, he asked on his own. Kala, can I accompany you to Lingyan Temple tomorrow? Looking at Zephyr's eager eyes, I remembered that tomorrow was the day to go to Lingyan Temple to pray for Eric. But Eric had already woken up, and I didn't need to go there frequently anymore. Considering this, I shook my head at Zephyr. Zephyr, I don't need you to accompany me. Staring at Zephyr's drooping mouth, I thought for a while and added, I won't go there again in the future. As soon as I finished speaking, the disappointment on Zephyr's face instantly turned into despair. 18 That night, Zephyr, with red eyes, forced a smile and said goodnight to me before leaving. He didn't harass me for a while until one day. He said solemnly that he wanted to see me. I agreed. But Zephyr broke the appointment again. Kala. Zephyr's voice on the phone was hurried. I'm at my cousin's house. Something has happened to him. I can't go to see you. My heart skipped a few beats. Eric. What happened to him? My mind went blank instantly. I turned around and ran towards Eric's house as fast as I could. From a distance, I saw the person sitting on the edge of the rooftop. He was so thin that it seemed he would be blown off by the wind in the next second. Tears welled up in my eyes. I could only run faster. Faster. Eric. If Kala is dead, I will still be with you. If you really jump off, I won't live either. As soon as I reached the rooftop entrance, I heard Nova's crying. Nova. I don't know what my parents did to make you misunderstand. The voice that haunted my dreams rang out. Whether you live or die has nothing to do with me. Eric, who was usually gentle, asked coldly at this moment. Nova turned around and left in embarrassment. She bumped into me hard. But I didn't have time to argue with her. Eric, I shouted. The two remaining people on the rooftop turned their heads at the same time. Eric's eyes were full of confusion. He didn't recognize me. Kala, why are you here? Zephyr also looked at me, who was in tears. With a blank face. Zephyr, don't ask. I beg you. Go downstairs and wait for us. I pleaded. Zephyr's face changed several times and finally he left in silence. On the broad rooftop, only Eric and I were left. 19 Eric. Can you come down first? I carefully approached Eric step by step. Eric shook his head and showed a polite but distant smile. Kala, I'm sorry for scaring you at our first meeting. Eric said he was very happy because he was about to meet his lover soon. I saw his body lean out a little more. No. Eric. Kala is not dead. In a hurry. I couldn't help but blurt out. Eric stopped. He turned his head and looked at me blankly. Eric. Kala is not dead. She just can't recognize you. The grievances in my heart burst out completely at this moment. I cried and shouted. She has become another person. She has even become someone else's wife. She can never come back to you. Eric. She can't come back. My heart ached as if stabbed by a knife. And I knelt on the ground in pain. Until I fell into a warm embrace. Kala. Is it you? Eric asked me, trembling lie again, and again. I was sobbing so hard that I could only nod desperately and hug him tightly back. I heard Derek ask me softly if I didn't recognize him all this time because of Zephyr. I frowned, not knowing how to explain to him, but Eric seemed to misunderstand. He even comforted me and told me not to be embarrassed. Kala. If you only want to be Kala. Be Zephyr's wife. I will keep this secret. Kala. I just want you to be happy. Eric's smile was uglier than crying, which made me angry and heartbroken at the same time. Idiot. Are you so magnanimous as to give me to someone else? I'm uttered unhappily and raised my head to kiss Eric on the lips. I was so focused that I didn't hear the approaching footsteps at all. Kala. What are you doing? Zephyr's angry roar came. He stared at me and Derek with wide eyes, unable to believe what he saw. 20 Kala. Is this the reason why you must get divorced? How long has my brother been awake? And you've already hooked up with him? After coming down from the rooftop, Zephyr kept taunting me coldly. Seeing his face getting paler as he spoke, I couldn't help but ask him if he had brought his medicine. When you were kissing my brother just now, why didn't you worry about whether my heart could bear it? Zephyr couldn't help but raise his voice and asked me sarcastically, under Zephyr's angry gaze. I hesitated again and finally told him everything. From being reborn, to the system, and then to conquering him to save Eric. The only thing I didn't mention was the miserable deaths in the previous 9 failed attempts to conquer. Since I had already successfully conquered him, mentioning those things now would seem like deliberately playing the victim. At first, Zephyr frowned tightly, but later his face became expressionless. So, when you said you didn't love me, it was true, right? Seeing me nod, Zephyr suddenly kicked over the coffee table in front of me, his expression becoming angry and distorted. Kala. You tricked me. How dare you trick me? Zephyr gritted his teeth as if he was about to rush up and tear me apart. But the next second, streams of tears ran down from his eyes. I had never seen Zephyr look so desperate. He cried silently, looking so fragile that he seemed to break at the slightest touch. I opened my mouth but didn't know how to comfort him. Kala. Zephyr's hoarse voice came. You are the most hateful woman I've ever seen. Zephyr pinched my chin hard. I was forced to raise my head and look into his eyes. Hatred. Unwillingness. Pain. Sadness. Zephyr's expression changed several times and finally he smiled bitterly as if resigned. I should hate you. Kala. He murmured and dejectedly rested his head on my shoulder. But why can't I be cruel enough? 21 that day. Zephyr and I parted on bad terms. Kala, don't even think about getting divorced from me. Zephyr's tone was more serious than ever. He said that since I had deceived him, he wouldn't let me have my way. After Zephyr left, Eric asked me worriedly if I wanted to talk to him. I silently shook my head. Eric was a deep thinker. If he knew the truth, he would probably blame himself even more. Kala, no matter what happens, I will always be with you. Eric didn't ask any more questions, and just kissed me gently on the forehead. I told Eric that I would solve the matter between Zephyr and me as soon as possible. But when all the lawyers in the city were unwilling to take on my divorce case, I couldn't help but call Zephyr and ask him what he wanted to do. Kala, you cuckolded me. Do you still expect me to make way for your love? Zephyr never had anything nice to say. I suppressed my unhappiness and explained. Zephyr, if it hadn't been for that accident last time, I would never have revealed my identity to Eric in my life. I want a divorce simply because I don't love you. Zephyr angrily told me to shut up. Kala, it was you who came to provoke me first. Don't even think about getting a divorce. Zephyr's paranoia completely enraged me, and I retorted bitterly. Zephyr, our marriage is only in name. I can completely go to the hospital for a hymen test. If you don't divorce me, I will find male models every day to cuckold you. Zephyr hung up the phone without a word. When I regained my sanity, I thought what I had said was a bit too much. There was a deliberate cough from behind. I turned around and saw Eric standing at the door. Kala, I didn't mean to overhear what you said. Eric seemed to be hesitating, but there was a smile in his eyes. But after thinking it over again and again, I still want to give it a try. Before you find male models, can you consider me first? 22 I knew that Eric was just trying to make me happy. But I still blushed instantly. After Eric left, soon my mobile phone rang. Kala, what was my brother doing at your place for so long? Zephyr's voice was slurred with drunkenness, and he asked me angrily as soon as he opened his mouth. I was too lazy to communicate with a drunk, and was just about to hang up. But suddenly he softened his tone and pleaded weakly. Kala, pay attention to me, okay? I'm wrong. I shouldn't have made you angry this afternoon. Kala, I miss you so much. How can you be so cruel to me? Tell me what's so good about my cousin. I'll just change accordingly. Kala, my heart hurts so much. If you don't come back, I'll throw away my medicine. Zephyr kept talking on his own, but I immediately felt a headache. I remembered what the system had said and couldn't help but get angry. Zephyr, your heart can't bear your antics. Don't be so self-willed. Okay? The voice on the other side stopped abruptly. After a moment of silence, Zephyr suddenly asked me if I had ever prayed for him during my many visits to Lingyan Temple. Even just once. His voice was choked with sobs. I suddenly remembered the day when Eric woke up and I went to Lingyan Temple to fulfill my vow. I had already stepped out of the Buddha hall. But then I turned around and knelt in front of the Buddha again, praying for Zephyr's happiness and well-being. I thought that Zephyr could be considered a key factor in Eric's awakening, but this truth was too cruel. If I told the truth, I was afraid that Zephyr would really be so angry that he would vomit blood. Seeing that I didn't say anything for a long time, Zephyr sneered at himself. Kala, you're really heartless. With a murmur, the phone was hung up. I sighed and called Zephyr's secretary. 23 that night, Zephyr was sent to the hospital again. The doctor said that if he continued to mess around regardless of his life, his heart could last for at most 1 more year. Zephyr calmly said on the phone that he wanted to see me. Finally, we made an appointment for the day he was discharged from the hospital 3 days later. But on the night before the meeting, I had an accident. When I woke up again, I found myself lying in an abandoned warehouse in the suburbs. Nova was standing in front of me with a hideous face. Kala. Her shrill voice cut through the silent night, which made me shudder instantly. You slut. Having Zephyr isn't enough. And you even want to seduce Eric. Zephyr actually warned me because of you. What kind of magic potion did you give him? As she spoke, she slapped me hard twice. And the taste of blood immediately filled my mouth. My whole body was weak. So I could only keep silent, knowing that I couldn't rashly anger her at this moment. But Nova was crazy. She laughed and said that she would set fire to this place and create the illusion that I had committed suicide. You lunatic. I spat the blood-mixed saliva onto her face viciously. But she laughed even louder. The warehouse was large. Nova only lit a corner on the first floor. She didn't want me to die too quickly. She said that she would let me watch death approaching and suffer great pain. The mobile phone was not far from me, but I didn't have the strength to reach it. The system retired after my task was successful. Without its protection, there was nothing I could do but wait for death. The feeling of being burned to death was really unpleasant. Unfortunately, I couldn't adjust the pain perception anymore. I thought despairingly until I heard someone calling my name. With the hurried footsteps. Before I could see clearly who was in front of me, I was tightly hugged into his arms. 24, Zephyr. Why are you? I stared blankly at Zephyr in front of me. He was still wearing a hospital gown. And there was a patch of blood on the back of his hand. What? Are you disappointed that it's not my brother? Zephyr gasped for breath and said sorry. Without waiting for my answer, he picked me up and ran towards the exit. Zephyr was focused on avoiding the thick smoke. But he forgot about the wooden boxes piled up on the side. Boom. With a loud noise. I seemed to hear the sound of bones breaking. At the moment when the wooden boxes collapsed, I was tightly protected in Zephyr's arms. Zephyr. Zephyr's leg was pressed by the wooden boxes. I wanted to help him, but I was powerless. Kala. Zephyr's face was as white as a sheet. And he coughed up a mouthful of blood. His arms around me tightened. Don't waste your energy. There was no signal in the warehouse. And the mobile phone was useless. Despair once again enveloped us. Kala. If there was no cousin, would you have fallen in love with me? In the silence, Zephyr's voice suddenly rang out. He looked down at me, stubbornly waiting for an answer. I couldn't bear it in my heart, but still shook my head. Zephyr, when you left me for Nova for the first time, I was doomed not to love you. The love I want is mutual respect and also eternal and unique preference. Zephyr's eyes turned red instantly. He curled his lips, his smile uglier than crying. Kala, even when you're about to die, you don't want to lie to me. I whispered sorry. But Zephyr closed his eyes and stopped looking at me. Under the thick smoke, I don't know how much time had passed. I seemed to hear someone calling my name. Zephyr suddenly lifted my head and rubbed my lips repeatedly with his fingertip. His eyes were tender, as if full of endless nostalgia and reluctance. Kala, I installed a locator in your mobile phone. On the way to find you. I hesitated again and again, but still sent a message to my cousin. Now, I'm extremely glad that I made this decision. Even if you are so cruel to me, I can't bear to let you die with me. There was a sigh in my ear, and the next second, my lips were pressed against something hot and moist. 25's effort kissed me passionately. I was so anxious that I bit his lip. But the kiss didn't stop until Eric arrived. The fire was getting bigger and bigger. The wooden boxes were too heavy for Eric to move even a little. Cousin, save Kala first, Zephyr said as he handed me in his arms to Eric. Eric glanced at my swollen lips, and his arms around me tight, and instantly, I buried my head in his chest, a little embarrassed lie. Zephyr, I'll come to save you right away. At the moment when Eric turned around, I heard Zephyr's voice. Kala, does it hurt when being burned to death? I suddenly raised my head, unable to believe my ears. At the moment when our eyes met, the sadness in Zephyr's eyes almost overflowed. He dejectedly lowered his head and murmured, so those dreams were all true. Cousin. Zephyr smiled at Eric with relief. Do you know that you could wake up because I finally fell in love with Kala? But actually, This was her 10th attempt to make me fall in love with her. She failed 9 times. And died unfortunately each time because I didn't love her. She endured the grievances I brought her. Endured the painful torture of death. Just to fulfill the wish of making you wake up. Cousin. Calla loves you very much. You must cherish her. I didn't expect that Zephyr had all the previous memories. And even more unexpected was that he would tell Eric everything. He looked serious. As if he was saying his last words. Eric's arms holding me trembled constantly. And his tears dripped onto my face. When Eric and I escaped. The firefighters also arrived at the scene. Eric put me down and was about to rush into the fire. But at the moment he turned around, the warehouse suddenly collapsed. I took a step forward and hugged him tightly. Eric was in tears, shouting Zephyr like crazy. Looking at the raging flames in front of me, I remembered Zephyr's eyes looking at me affectionately. He pointed to his lips with a smile and said to me that he had already received the reward for saving me. And if he died, I didn't need to feel guilty anymore. At this moment, I couldn't hold back the grief in my heart either and burst into loud crying. This was the first time Zephyr watched my leaving back. But it also became the last time between him and me in this life. Zephyr died in that big fire. Nova deliberately set fire. Which was a heinous act and she was punished by the law. But I knew that Zephyr's family would not let her off easily. After coming out of the fire scene, I was seriously ill and muddled all the time. When I fully recovered, I secretly boarded a plane for a long journey without telling anyone. After all, Zephyr died because of me. I thought that in this life, there was no possibility between Eric and me anymore. After staying in a fishing village by the sea for a year, I dreamed of Zephyr for the first time. He said that Eric was almost crazy looking for me. And unexpectedly, after his death, he still had to help Eric. He babbled a lot more. But when I woke up, I only remembered him finally saying goodbye to me with a smile. I was awakened by a knock on the door. Calla. When I opened the door, I fell into a familiar and reassuring embrace.